Interior hotel lobby, take 3-4. Marker. And 5-4. Hi, I'm Kevin G. Bender, the director, producer, and head editor of The Receipt, and I'm here to take you on an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at the making of a scene. Any good scene begins with a good script. The director, in this case me, reads the lines in the script and makes notes for both the actors and for the crew. Camera placement, beats in the scene, perhaps even editing notes are made on the script. From there, a shot list or storyboard is compiled. The storyboard could take the form of actually drawn-out pictures, or perhaps more likely will take the form of a list of shots which will be filmed, perhaps not in that order. Once on set, the director and the cinematographer will collaborate on shot composition and lighting, and the director will collaborate with the sound designer or set sound recordist on where to position the microphones, such that they're off-frame and can capture all of the audio that you need for the scene. Shot composition is incredibly important and can make or break a scene in many cases. Movement of the camera can determine the dynamic of the scene, how fast or slow the scene feels. Of course, another way of doing that is editing, which I'll discuss later. In any scene, you always want to shoot a master because it's essential for editing purposes and it's essential for establishing the scene. In addition to the master, you typically film close-ups of the major characters in the scene, perhaps mid-shots, and additional pickup shots. Once you've shot all the different takes that you need for all the proper coverage and have successfully completed shooting everything that would be on your shot list or storyboard, from there the scene goes into post-production. The first part of the post-production process is to upload the video from your camera deck onto the computer, which you'll use for editing. 50% of directing a film is really done in post-production, because in post-production is when the director can really control the audience's point of view, the perspective, and what you see. In film, you can actually control what the audience does and doesn't see by how you cut the scene. So, how an audience perceives of a character or a plot point will be infinitely linked to how the scene is edited and what characters or images are on the scene when a specific line of dialogue is delivered or a specific event in the scene occurs. So, editing is really the most important piece of the filmmaking process, because that's really when you take your raw materials and craft them into what the audience will inevitably see when the film is completed. So you have to be very nuanced and aware of what you're doing when you're editing a film, more than just assembling the materials. You have to make conscious decisions about how the audience is going to perceive the scene when you cut the film. In the case of this particular scene, one of the things that I have to decide is how to set up the scene and how to establish the characters. Every scene in a movie is just like the entire movie itself. Every scene has its own exposition, rising action, climax, and falling action. And sort of standard operating procedure in editing is to cut the scene in such a way that that flow is visible even within an individual scene, just like it would be within the entire film. One of the things that you have to be aware of in terms of establishing that kind of plot arc is the average shot length. Within individual scenes, you emphasize the climax of the scene by increasing the speed of the editing, versus the beginning and the end of the scene, you have longer takes. Every scene typically begins with what we would call an establishing shot, which can be either an ECU, extreme close-up, of a particular object on the table, a kind of pickup shot, or maybe a POV shot, or a very wide, extreme long shot showing the entire set. At some point, you always have to pull back and show the entire set to establish the size of the space. Often that's done with the establishing shot, often that's done at another point in the scene. It depends upon how the director wants the audience to perceive the scene and enter into the scene, whether or not the director wants the audience to enter into the viewpoint of a specific character immediately, or to enter into the scene with a more panoramic image of what the entire set, the entire location looks and feels like. So after I begin the scene with an establishing shot, which I'll add later, I'll move into the master. And from the master, I'm going to cut to a close-up of Nora reacting to Evie's non-responsiveness, which you see, of course, initially in the master, which I'll hold a little bit longer than some of my other takes. On the timeline, I'm going to identify the point at which I want to add the next cut. Once I've established the point at which I'm going to add the next cut, I'm going to find my next angle and mark the in and out points of that angle which I'm going to use. In this instance, I'm going to cut to a mid-shot of Nora. I need to make sure in editing that the cut from the master to the mid-shot of Nora isn't awkward and that continuity is maintained. I can make subtle adjustments at a frame-by-frame level in order to achieve this. As you can see, Nora turns and looks at Evie. It's a film editing kind of convention to, when you have a character look at something that's off the frame, to, in some way or another, show what that character is looking at. In this instance, I have two options. I can use a pickup shot that I've taken, a POV shot of Nora looking at Evie, or I can go back to the master. In this case, since I have a point of view shot of Nora looking at Evie, this is an ideal place to use that shot. I'm going to go ahead and mark this shot out at this moment and find the point of view shot of Nora looking at Evie and put that shot onto the timeline. After the point of view shot of Evie, I'll cut back to Nora's mid-shot. One, because this would seem the logical next progression in the scene, also because of the emphasis of the scene up to this point has been on Nora's reaction. I'll hold on Nora's mid-shot for a moment longer before I cut back to the master. As you can see, I've made slight adjustments to the pacing of the scene vis-a-vis the master. Therefore, the timing with the master may no longer be perfect, in which case I'll simply have to copy the master and mark the master in at a new point before continuing editing. As you can see, there's a continuity break in terms of the way in which Nora is leaning between her mid-shot and the master. In order to maintain continuity, I'm going to have to use a different shot between Nora's mid-shot and the master, even though ideally I would like to go immediately back to the master. In this case, the most logical shot to use is a shot in which Nora is not in, aka a mid-shot of the receptionist. It's not illogical at this point to want to show the receptionist's reaction either. So far, she hasn't been a very important part of this scene. Maybe this would be an ideal place to bring her point of view into the scene by adding a shot of the receptionist between Nora and the master. Here we have delivered the first line of dialogue in the scene, immediately after the receptionist reaches out to grab the bell. It's not an important enough line to emphasize that I want to make a cut at this point. However, the receptionist's next line is of a somewhat comedic nature to show the change in emotion which will have taken place from annoyance to, incredulous disbelief. I want to emphasize this by making a cut in the editing. So from the master at this point, I'm going to cut to the mid-shot of the receptionist again, which will then elicit a further negative response from Nora, at which point it also makes sense to use her mid-shot rather than the long shot, because only Nora is on the screen delivering a line, and because I want to emphasize Nora's reaction, that the tension of the scene, the tension between the two characters, is at this point escalating. We're now in the realm of the rising action rather than the exposition. The editing should be faster and should come closer to the characters rather than in long shots and extreme long shots. We should be seeing more and more close-ups as the tension in the scene increases, and the speed of editing should become more rapid as we go through the rising action approaching the climax. After Nora's mid-shot, I've gone again back to the master because I wanted to show every character's reaction to her "the keys please" line, in which it's a very dramatic kind of overemphasized moment of the scene which deserves a beat and therefore a cut in the editing. And also I wanted to keep the pacing of the scene rapid at this point by having 3 cuts in quick succession after holding on the master for a relatively long amount of time. From here, I'm going to delve a little bit further into the receptionist character, which has so far not been terribly emphasized in the scene, who probably started off angry and tired and anxious to leave, and she's now been exasperated by Nora's extraordinarily rude and obnoxious behavior. Following much of the same procedure that I have in the past few takes, I've extended the length of this scene. cutting to both the beats of the scene and maintaining continuity at the same time. Reaction shots are immensely important to the editing of every scene. Nora's reaction has been inserted at a key point during the receptionist's final line to emphasize her reaction to the receptionist's very rude comeback to Nora. And Nora's reaction is essential to advancing the character development in the scene as well as in the context of the entire film. Through editing, we're able to control the audience's perspective on the scene and emphasize certain points in the scene. Evie, who says nothing in the scene, is nevertheless an essential part of the scene, kept in the scene by means of certain cuts to show her passivity in the scene. This scene within the context of the film establishes a number of things about the characters that are rather important. Evie as the shy, passive character, and Nora as the somewhat gregarious, very loud, and boisterous character. And that's done very, very much through this scene, which is one of the very first scenes in the movie and sets up the dynamic between these two characters. The way I've cut the scene de-emphasizes the receptionist's rudeness and emphasizes Nora's rudeness, although they have a back-and-forth dynamic throughout the scene, which is done through the rapidity of the editing at certain points, climaxing with the close-up of the receptionist dropping the keys on the table, which is the climax point of the scene, emphasized by the editing. Although they have a back-and-forth throughout the scene, it's Nora's rudeness and Nora's impatience that is emphasized in the cutting rather than the receptionist's. Her rudeness is seen more as a response to Nora's activity than vice versa, the way the scene has been cut. Now that the scene has been cut in its entirety, it's time to sync the location audio to the audio that was recorded to the camera. We recorded all of our audio separately from the camera to a recording device and a laptop computer using a number of boom microphones and an interface called the Traveler. Therefore, the audio that's been recorded to the camera is not the actual audio that we'll use in the final film. The actual audio I get from my sound engineer, at which point I have to go take his audio and sync it to the audio that was recorded on the set. Now that all the audio in the scene has been synced to the original video files, it's time to be handed back over to the audio engineer for final mastering and for the building of the room ambient, the cleaning up of the Foley, final noise reduction, and mastering.
Dialogue is the most important part of any film, and it's essential that it's synced and done correctly. So the picture editor in this case also served as a dialogue editor, that's Bender, and he picked scenes, he picked the takes that he wanted to use specific words and phrases for, because that was fairly easy for him to do with his tool set. All that got exported over to my desk, and then I imported it into my sequencer of choice, Digital Performer, and with that imported all of his audio edits. From that point, dialogue editing is mainly looking for little things. It is the minuscule little errors that make a movie, that either make or break a movie. For instance, if the first syllable of a word is cut off, or if you hear something in the background that you don't want to hear. It was really important to remove these little things, because that's what you notice when you're watching it. Once the dialogue's complete or roughly complete, we start on the ambient, what I call the ambient, or the room, or the environmental sound, and that's everything else. That consists of, say if you're outside, well, outside you're going to hear people, you're going to hear, if it's summertime, you're going to hear birds or animals or things. If you're inside, you're going to hear, it depends on where you are. If you're in a cafe, well, you're going to hear people talking. If you're in an apartment, you might hear an air conditioner, you might hear a washing machine. All these little things, and they're very important. And along with this comes special effects. Things used to either sweeten or to what's called a hard effect, which is something that actually happens on set. So if you put a glass down, you should hear a glass go down. And depending on how the dialogue is edited, that kind of effect may get omitted, just as part of the natural editing process. So the sound editor has to add these things back to make it realistic. And that is the hardest thing to find, because you don't often notice it, and you just ignore it. But every time you watch it, you realize that there's something missing here or something missing there, and you have to add these back. So once these two things are complete, these two steps, dialogue and ambient or environment, they get put together in a final project, as it were, with the entire video. And those get synced up to each scene. And then the music comes in from the music composer. Those will come in as just audio files, and those are basically drop-ins.
So working with the Make Music finale, which is one of the standards in the composition field, and actually put together full sheet music for the entire score was definitely the first step. From there, all of the songs are rendered out to MIDI files and brought into Cubase Studio, which is essentially it's a music production suite. So we take this Cubase program and able to work with that alongside a set of tools called Vienna Strings. And actually, we have the full Vienna ensemble, which is in contrast to MIDI, is actually a very, very large database of instrument samples. They essentially would take professional musicians, sit them down in a room, say, I want you to play an A, go. All right, play it again, go. Play it again, okay? Now play it differently. Now play it a little bit more differently. Now play it more and more differently. And they do this and they collect this into a huge database of sounds and files for all sorts of different articulations, staccato, détaché, portamento, all these different articulations that you can do. And then this application will compile them together with what I have dictated within the MIDI set to be able to actually make very, very convincing sounding instrumentation. And this is very advantageous for what we're trying to do here, in that we were not required to hire sets of musicians. I was able to do all of this digitally, and with results that to 95% of people sound basically identical. They would not be able to tell the difference between the final Vienna Strings mixdown and a recording of the live musicians. So from there, we're just able to render out the final score, which was then passed off to Mike in the sound department.
Once all this is complete, you almost have the movie right there. Then the final thing is called mastering, and what that consists of is simply making sure the volume's consistent from scene to scene, shot to shot, making sure that all the effects are audible, making sure the music's at the right volume, and then any kind of mixing that needs to be done at that point. Say there's a very serious scene or something important, the music and the ambient sound may just kind of fade out a little bit, and that gets taken care of at that stage. And then you put a little polish on it, and you have your audio.
Now that we have the final audio and the final music to be put into the scene, the last step in the post-production process is color correction. For this scene, we'll apply some subtle color correction to make the final video slightly more refined and of a higher contrast than the raw video, so that it looks crisper and more vivid in the final rendered version of the film. Once the entire video has been properly color corrected so that every shot looks exactly the same in terms of the lighting and color dynamics of the video, then the video is rendered out. As you can by now doubtless tell, an immense amount of time, work, effort, thought, and energy goes into every second of the final film. It requires an immense number of people, from the director to a composer, the cinematographer, the sound editor, and of course the cast. And each and every one of those people is immensely important to the final quality of the film. The hard work and efforts of a huge number of cast and crew are evident in every moment of a film. I hope this brief featurette has been educational and informative on what goes into the filmmaking process to take one page of an 80-page script and turn it into a film. And now, without any further ado, we can give you Sequence 2.
Welcome to the Mountainside Resort. May I have the name on the reservation?
We're here to pick up the keys to our condo. I think they're on reserve.
Are you Dr. Kenneth Rosen?
Yes. Yes, I am. The keys, please.
The resort restaurant is up the hill and open for lunch and dinner. The pool will be closed for repairs until Saturday.
What? What kind of a resort doesn't have a pool? What the hell are we supposed to do all weekend?
I'm sure you'll come up with something. Now, unless you require my services further, have a nice